Awesome. Thank you, Zoom and Betsy. So now I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Puget Sound Energy. We have Julian Lowe here with us this morning just to give a few sponsor remarks and kick off the program. Julian?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Julian Lowe, Local Government Affairs Manager for Puget Sound Energy. I would have gotten dressed up today if we were all at the WAC, but I'm just going to go with my normal protocol, which is a hoodie here at the house. Puget Sound Energy is proud to sponsor this presentation of the Index 2 results. PSE uses EMC research for our quantitative and qualitative research needs. Ages ago when I was interning at the Seattle City Council, folks were saying, you know what, EMC research is the best firm in town for research, and we are very pleased to support this effort also because in any campaign or in any business, you really want to have all the important information before making decisions, and really pleased that Rachel and the entire chamber team are taking this strategic approach to really understanding the views of the voters. And it really, again, shows that the chamber's strategic plan and our public policy agenda is right in line with Seattle voters. And so with that, I'd like to hand it over to Rachel and Andrew. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julian. You say that almost as if you used to work at EMC or something like that. So thank you, everybody. It is lovely to see all of you this morning. My name is Rachel Smith, President and CEO of the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, and joined today, as Julian said, by Andrew Tebow, Senior Principal at EMC Research. We are delighted to be here with you on this early Monday morning, and delighted to share this research with you that we've done. So today we're going to, as Julian said, kind of review the second installment of the Chamber's Public Opinion Research Project, the Index, conducted in March. And just as kind of a reminder for folks, the Index really measures quality of life over time by asking Seattle voters what they think about the region's most pressing issues. Sometimes we get the chamber or question of like, why does the chamber do this? And the reason is that quality of life is critical to our business community as we work to attract and retain employees, either to move here or to stay here. Quality of life has a significant impact on our ability to compete globally for our local workforce. Employers and their employees live and work and recreate and have families and, yes, vote here. And so through the index, we are able to surface the voters' opinions to inform the conversation around complex issues, and also demonstrate where there's broad agreement from the public. So I think as you'll see this today, the voice of the Seattle voters is crystal clear. We're united on the most pressing issues, we're united on the solutions, and we're united on our need to address them with urgency. I'll also say as a way of intro, like, some of these numbers in the research are stark. They are tough to see. So everybody take a deep breath before we get into this. But that being said, I have a great deal of optimism. Because the voters have laid out a very clear path, and it is one that sort of rejects the ideological binaries, and it embraces the kind of and approach to solutions. It's also one that I think centers our values, and that if we get on that path, it's going to enhance our quality of life here for everyone. And it's certainly a path that I think we at the chamber here are kind of ready to get to work on. So just a couple of punchlines before I turn it over to Andrew. And I say these really just to kind of have in your mind as you're absorbing a lot of information that's going to be coming at you here in just a moment. So one, the honeymoon is short when it comes to where we are right now. When the mood of the electorate is what it is, we know that we have to have a bias towards action. Two, we, this employer community, has the opportunity to enter the conversation, and I mean every conversation, on the side of the voters. We can and we need to, and it helps us build influence, and it helps us build trust in the community. It also helps us bring my trademark sanity and guardrails to the policy conversations that we want to have here in the city. I'll also flag, and Andrew will talk more about this, but the sort of big differences that you typically see between kind of renters and homeowners and white people and people of color and old and young and men and women, they're much more muted now. And what it means is that we are more aligned and we are more united. And then I think the last two things I'd say are, one, the far left or the social left or the radical left or whatever you want to call it, they've overreached and they didn't listen and they didn't work in coalition and they didn't make the kind of change that the voters wanted to see. So we can, we are listening. The coalition is us, and we can make that change if we do our work right. And sort of getting back to what Julian said at the beginning of this, if we align our policy work as a chamber, which we are, we really can make change. So Andrew's, I'm going to turn it over to him to lead us through all the numbers. Like I said, you're going to get a lot of information, and then we'll make sure we have plenty of time for discussion and questions. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Andrew.
Here we go. Still learning to use Zoom. All right, jumping right in. I'm going to go really fast here. I normally talk at a reasonable pace, but I want to get to your questions. So starting with the methodology here, this is a mixed mode. All that means is we do both phone and internet. The internet portion is text to web. We do that so that we can find young people more than anything else, and renters and some key demographics that are hard to reach by cell or the few remaining landlines. This is a survey of registered voters, so it's not tailored towards any specific election turnout. It was conducted in the middle of March. We did 700 total interviews. We did 100 interviews per city council district. Then we weighted the data back so that it reflects the registered voter population in the city of Seattle by age, by geographic distribution, by homeowner renter status, by all the key demographic variables. So it is reflective of the city's registered voter population. And where applicable, we're comparing the results back to the first index, which was done in August of 2021. There's some new questions in here, but there's also a good deal of tracking data to show you trends. Some notes, as I mentioned, we're looking at all registered voters. And the reason for this is not a campaign poll. It is about attitudes over time and understanding the opinion environment that public policy discussions are occurring in. The registered voter universe is younger, more progressive, more likely to be renters, more likely to be new to the city, and more likely to be people of color. As likely voter universes get narrow and narrower, as turnout goes down, it becomes much older and much more established and higher percentage of homeowners. In this survey, 6 in 10 Seattle voters self-identified as Democrats. So any of these overall questions that you see where it's 80% this or 60% that opinion is being driven by Democrats because they are the majority in this city. Looking at the respondent profile, a couple of interesting things to point out here. This 50% renter, 50% homeowner, in a narrower universe, a likely voter, that might be 55 or 58% homeowner. But this, as Rachel said earlier, recently has been the big divide in our politics. So you could look at any issue and a majority of renters would be on one side and a majority of homeowners would be on the other. Those differences are much narrower in this, and we're not going to spend much time on, or really any time on, subgroups in this presentation because we have so much data. But the full deck with all the subgroup slides for every question and the crosstabs are available online. The other thing I'm going to point out, socialists self-identified make up 7% of the city in this survey. Typically, we do not break out a group that's this small, but the self-identified socialists, their attitudes are so different and consistently different in the direction that you'd expect that when you go to the Chamber's website and look at the subgroup data, you'll see socialists broken out. We also created 3 regions. So north is districts 4, 5, and 6 up here at the top. Central is 3 and 7, and south is 1 and 2. This tells you the percentages of the total survey population in each of those regions. Summary. So Seattle voters have grown even more pessimistic about the direction of the city and about overall quality of life, but they're still guardedly optimistic about the region's future. We'll see the specific numbers once we get through these summary slides. 2/3 of Seattle voters, including at least 6 in 10 voters in every major subgroup, have actively considered moving out of Seattle. That was at 60% last time. It's jumped to 67%. When we ask people why they've actively considered moving, cost of living and housing affordability is the top response, followed by public safety. Homelessness continues to be the top concern of Seattle voters, but there's been a dramatic increase in concerns about public safety. It's now mentioned by close to public safety related issues are now mentioned by close to half of Seattle voters, and concerns about affordability and cost of living have also increased. A majority of voters in every subgroup mention homelessness as an issue they are frustrated or concerned about. There's near universal agreement on expanding state and regional partnerships to address homelessness and investing more in behavioral health. And voters strongly prefer providing outreach and then closing encampments rather than a blanket stop the sweeps approach. An increasing number of voters say that they would not feel safe visiting downtown, both during the day and at night. And 3/4 say their own neighborhood feels less safe compared to 2 years ago. So when Rachel said there's some tough numbers to swallow here, you're starting to see that. The top 5 issues. So we asked a question, what would have the biggest impact on improving quality of life? The top 5 issues are the mirror the voters' top concerns. So they say improving quality of life. The biggest impact would be addressing public safety issues. And there were 3 of the top 5 were related to public safety. So violent crime and gun violence, property crime, and public safety concerns facing local businesses. Those were all in the top 5. The other 2 in the top 5 for improving quality of life, removing tent encampments and maintaining bridges and infrastructure. Voters continue to support increased density with near universal support for making it easier to build housing in transit and commercial areas, and super majority support for housing, more housing in their neighborhood, and for changing regulations to support more density in single family home zones.
Hey, Andrew.
Yep.
I've got clarifying questions coming into the chat, so I'm just going to stop you when those come in. So Irene wants to know, when you're talking about changes in attitudes, that is relative to the last survey done when? So you're talking about our previous index done in August, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and just jump in because most voters are concerned about downtown's future, and that concern has increased since the August survey. Voters continue to overwhelmingly agree that downtown is important to the region's economic recovery, and that addressing homelessness and public safety issues is essential in order for downtown to recover. A majority of voters say they will visit downtown less often for non-work activities than pre-pandemic, and that percentage has increased since August of 2021. Voters do not trust the city council on police reform, and they strongly prefer an approach that includes fundamental reform and hiring more officers rather than an approach that focuses on defunding the police and decriminalizing nonviolent misdemeanors. Nearly 6 in 10 voters think local taxes are too high for the level of services the city provides, and a growing supermajority of voters do not trust the city to spend their tax dollars responsibly. However, despite declining trust and increasing concern about taxes, Seattle voters are still open to investing more to address their top concern, which is homelessness. I'll talk a little bit more about that in that section. After hearing information about the city's budget deficit by a 2-to-1 margin, voters would prefer prioritizing the basics while protecting the city's most vulnerable rather than increasing taxes to maintain spending and cover the deficit. By an 11-point margin, voters think increasing access and opportunity is a more effective path to wider prosperity than increasing taxes and redistribution. There are some subgroups, self-identified socialists, and a narrow majority of renters and voters aged 30 to 49 who would rather increase taxes and increase redistribution rather than increase access and opportunity. Voters continue to overwhelmingly agree that Seattle does not have enough affordable, high quality childcare. So now getting into the numbers. I'll pause. Rachel, if there's anything in the chat.
Nope, we're good.
So we aggregate 7 questions to form this quality of life index that goes from 0, which is very negative, to 10, which is very positive. In August, we were at 3.79 on a 10-point scale. The midpoint here would be a 5. We're now at 3.47, so you see a bit of a drop. So these are the questions that are included in that quality of life index. We're going to go through those individually as well. The index does not include any measures related to voter perceptions of Seattle's government or elected leaders. Again, it's not a campaign or political poll, except to the extent that all public policy is political. So some of these questions that make up the index: right direction, wrong track, which is an industry standard question. I always point out that this is an unbalanced question. So it says, do you feel that things in the city of Seattle are generally going in the right direction, or do you feel things have gotten pretty seriously off on the wrong track? So the bar is higher on the negative side. We ask it this way because it's been asked this way for decades in the public opinion research industry. So we have great tracking data. You can see even with that higher bar on the negative, 3/4 of Seattle voters think things are pretty seriously off on the wrong track. That's an 8-point increase since August of 2021. Do you think the overall quality of life in Seattle is better, the same, or worse than it was 4 years ago? 81% worse, similar to where it was last time. Then we asked an agree, disagree. I'm optimistic about the future of this region. Normally, if you saw 50-50 on optimistic about the future of the region, you would say, well, that's not good news. But in an environment where 76% think things are on the wrong track, 81% think things are quality of life is worse than 4 years ago, you have people who are saying wrong track and worse off agreeing that they're optimistic. So that is why we say guardedly optimistic about the future. Have you actively considered moving out of Seattle? 67% said yes. We included the word actively. That's a 7-point increase from August. What is the main reason you have considered moving? This is an open-end question. An open-end question, we don't give any responses. They type it in the text box or they say it on the phone. We then go through all those open-end responses and aggregate them into categories. So you lose a bit of the detail here, but it tells you what's top of mind. The most significant mention, with 35% mentioning it, was cost of things related to cost of living and affordable housing. That's up 12 points since August. And then crime and public safety is up 8 points as the second top mention. Top concerns. This is another open end. We've been asking this now for quite some time. What are the issues facing Seattle that you are most frustrated or concerned about? Again, an open end question where we build this into categories. If you heard me talk about this question over the last 5 years and maybe longer, it was homelessness and everything else. And really, in an open-end question, when things start to get into the 20s, that's a flashing light saying this is really something you got to sit up and pay attention to. It's really on voters' mind because, again, we're not prompting them with any responses. This is just what they're telling us. So homelessness has been dominating lists for the longest time. It was at 61% this time, incredibly high, down 5 points from August. But crime and public safety is up to 46%. It jumped 17 points since August. That's astounding. That kind of movement really tells you that this is front and center for voters. And then affordability and housing related issues at 22%, up another 7 points. So, homelessness still off the charts, but crime and public safety really spiking as concerns. This is that quality of life question. There's a lot of numbers here, so I'm going to take a little time to explain it. So the overall question is, how much impact do you think each of the following would have on improving quality of life in Seattle? This is a 1 to 7 scale. 1 is very little impact. 7 was very significant impact. So the midpoint on this scale would be a 4. So we're showing the 5s and 6s combined, and then the 7s, because that shows us the intensity. So the number of people who rated this as high as it possibly can. And then a second measure of intensity is top 2, where you take the 6s and the 7s. So at the higher end of the scale, That's what this top 2 number is. So if you look at the top 5 issues here, addressing violent crime and gun violence, the highest 86%, 5 or higher, maintaining bridges and infrastructure is at 86% at 5 or higher. And you might be saying, how did you guys sort this? We sorted it by top 2 as a measure of kind of expanded intensity. So you look at violent crime, 59% giving at the highest possible rating, a 7 on a 7-point scale, and 75%, 3/4 giving it a 6 or a 7. Closing encampments and parks on sidewalks and public ways, 78, 62. So this had the highest percentage of people saying very significant impact by a little bit. Addressing property crime, helping local businesses deal with public safety concerns. So those are your 3 out of the top 5 being public safety related. Maintaining bridges and infrastructure, high priority overall, a little bit lower on the very significant impact, but still quite high. And then I'll real quickly, making Seattle a good place to do business. All of these are a majority except reducing taxes. So making Seattle a good place to do business, 3/4, building more affordable housing, addressing organized retail theft, addressing racially biased policing, investing in more public transit, reducing carbon emissions and climate pollution, easing regulations to allow more outdoor restaurant seating, and then reducing local taxes. But you can see where the kind of the intensity drop-offs here. So these 2 really separate themselves in terms of intensity. Then you have this next level and then another drop-off. Breathe. Getting into the specific issues, top issues. So homelessness. These are forced choice questions where respondents are offered two statements, and we ask them to say which statement is closest to their opinion. The way we structured these is we looked for the language that the far left was using, that the activist left was using in their communications about these issues, and we tried to be faithful to that language. So we need to stop all sweeps immediately. Being unhoused is not a crime, and no individual should be moved unless they agree to alternative shelter or housing. And then we offered a second statement that was more kind of a, I don't know, establishment progressive, practical progressive, result-oriented progressive.
Andrew, maybe I just say just to echo what you just said, we tried to have integrity with which we used the other side's quote unquote language and tried to use that very directly from what they say to the newspaper, what they put on Twitter, et cetera. And then we juxtapose that against sort of a non-ideological, but sort of pragmatic-y progressive language. So that's, I think, kind of the juxtaposition there.
Right. So we should provide outreach and offer shelter and services to individuals before closing encampments, but we also need to stop enabling those who refuse services and camp illegally and remove encampments in city right-of-ways, parks, sidewalks, and other public areas. So there's a 73-point margin for the outreach and remove encampments. I'm fond of saying about Seattle that we're a highly overeducated city that likes to argue extensively about small ideological differences because we don't have really wide differences. But to see this level of consensus, and you'll see this time and again on one side of the issue, is really quite remarkable in Seattle. It does not happen that often. And that's the good news. I think the bad news is what's driving that consensus is that people are so frustrated and concerned about quality of life to the point of actively considering moving out of the city, that they have formed a consensus around doing something, action, improving things. Some more questions about homelessness. We need to expand state and regional partnerships to address the issues underlying homelessness. We did not ask this last time. This is new. 88 to 11. This is as close as you get to universal agreement. We need to invest in more behavioral health programs and services to address the issues underlying homelessness, 86% to 13%. Public safety, the second highest issue of concern. I would feel safe visiting downtown Seattle during the day. 61% agree, but that's down 6 points from August. I would feel safe visiting downtown Seattle at night. Only 26% agree. That's down 4 points from August. And then this is a new question. Thinking about safety in your neighborhood, including property crime and violent crime, would you say you feel more safe or less safe than you did 2 years ago? 3/4 saying less safe than 2 years ago. So pretty remarkable. Housing, so the third issue of concern, third highest issue of concern. I support policies that make it easier to build new housing in transit commercial areas. 82% agree, up 3 points. I support the building of new housing in my neighborhood. 66%, up 3 points. This is a new question. I support changing regulations to support more density in single family housing zones by allowing duplexes and triplexes in most Seattle neighborhoods. 61% agree. And then all things considered, growth and development has been a positive for my area. That's dropped quite a bit. It's at 49% agree. It was at 54% agree. But I will caution about this, as we see in housing research, the devil is always in the details on these things. But the really good news is there's not, well, the news, I guess, is that there's not any reflexive anti-density sentiment. When you come up with specifics, these numbers would certainly shift. Downtown and economic recovery. These are tracking questions as well. Downtown Seattle cannot fully recover until the homelessness and public safety problems are addressed. 91% agree, up 4 points. A thriving downtown Seattle is critical to our region's economic recovery. 91% agree, up 4 points. And I said this last time, and it's been a little while since we asked this countywide, but the last time we asked this, thriving downtown is critical to our region's economic recovery countywide, as many or more people outside of Seattle agreed with this. So they were, the region recognizes Seattle's importance. I'm worried about the future of downtown Seattle. This is up 8 points, 86% agree. Visiting downtown. So the question was, once things are completely open again for activities other than work, do you think you will visit downtown Seattle more, less, or about the same as you did before the pandemic? 51% saying less. That's up 6 points from August. And we looked at people who, this is their behavior pre-pandemic. So I visited a few times a week or more for things other than work. I visited several times a month more. I visited less often. So the people who are visiting the most pre-pandemic are the most likely to say they'll visit less often once things are back to whatever normal is. Police reform. Again, this forced choice where we try to capture the far left's position and then the practical progressive position contrasted against it. So our criminal justice system is fundamentally broken. We need to defund the police and decriminalize nonviolent misdemeanors that punish people who are just trying to survive. We cannot arrest our way out of homelessness and poverty. And then the other side, residents and small businesses are being left on their own to deal with theft, break-ins, and harassment. We need to enact strong reforms and invest in alternative policing and sentencing programs, but we also need to hire more officers and better trained officers, put habitual offenders in jail, and step up enforcement in places where crime is spiking. You see a 54-point margin here, 77 to 23. I trust the Seattle City Council to reform the Seattle Police Department without endangering public safety. This is essentially where it was in August. 30% agree, it's almost 7 in 10 disagree. Taxes and spending. I will preface this by saying that Seattle hasn't suddenly become a moderate city. It's still overwhelmingly progressive. Seattle is still Seattle. And even if there's broken trust at City Hall, if people are concerned about the level of taxes and the deficit, does not mean that they will not support tax measures. It just means that they're coming to it with a more skeptical eye now. So a question about the city budget deficit. We did an intro that over the last few years, the city has increased spending both to grow and preserve services and to help people impacted by the pandemic and economic downturn. Now the city is facing $150 million budget shortfall. Which of these options do you support for dealing with it? The city should work to offset the deficit by prioritizing basics, supporting our city's most vulnerable, and reducing non-critical spending before considering tax increases. 2/3 select that statement. versus the city should maintain the spending levels and programs in place today and raise taxes to cover this deficit. A third choosing that option. Some more questions about taxes and spending. Would you say that taxes in Seattle are too high, too low, or about right for the level of services the city provides? Nearly 6 in 10 saying that taxes are too high. I trust the city of Seattle to spend my tax dollars responsibly. Only 28% agree here. That's down 7 points. The city of Seattle needs more money to address homelessness. We didn't ask this last time. 61% agree, 40% disagree. So to the point of, you know, if it's for something voters are really concerned about, and obviously with any tax measure, it depends on how much it is, how it's going to be spent, and who's spending it. But you know, and we saw this also in the questions on homelessness about investing more in behavioral health programs and the regionalism there, investing more in underlying causes. Voters are still willing to invest for things that they think will make a difference on the ground and lead to improvements in the things that they are most concerned about. Opportunity and prosperity. So on the left side here, too many people are being left behind as Seattle becomes wealthier, more expensive, and income inequality becomes more extreme. We need to tax the wealthy and big corporations and redistribute that money to historically marginalized communities so they can share in Seattle's prosperity. Just over 4 in 10 selecting that option versus wealth and prosperity are not problems in and of themselves. The issue is access. We need to rethink and reshape policies to open pathways to opportunity. So a bunch of options here, 55-44 overall. I talked in the outset about there are some groups where this is, well, self-identified socialists, this is reversed, and a super majority of self-identified socialists, true to their ideology, would prefer to increase taxes and redistribution. It's more divided with some groups like younger voters and renters. Childcare, I think.
Real quick on that one.
Yep.
Just to say too, I think this, you know, coupled with some of the other pieces of data here, I mean, it demonstrates the affordability challenges that we have in the region. So, you know, I think more than any one particular thing in any of these two statements, it is that we know we have an affordability problem and people want action on it. So.
Yep. And then I believe this is the last question. So this is an agree, disagree. Our region does not have enough affordable, high quality childcare. 82% now agreeing that is up 8 points from where it was. And that is the last slide.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And as Andrew said, there is a ton of additional data here in terms of, you know, all that renters and homeowners, et cetera. That's all going to be on the Chamber's website, which I think actually it already is. So if people are curious about that, feel free to deep dive into it and feel free to let anybody on the Chamber team know if you have specific follow-up questions on that or want to use that data in any way. And we can make sure that whatever we're saying is accurate working with Andrew, because there's a lot here. So with that, I think we'll open it up to any questions or comments that folks might have.
The floor is open for questions. Just let us know over in the chat or raise your hand. I'll go ahead and stop the recording now.
Thanks.